Hey everybody, and happy Friday to you. Our pick-me-up today is coming from the book of 1 John, which I've been stuck in this week. My favorite chapter in here is probably 4, which aside from 1 Corinthians 13, we can consider the love chapter. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone that loves is born of God and knows God. In chapter 2, the author is talking about following after the commandments of God and righteousness. And I'll just pick it up here and read. In verse 3, it says, "Now by this we know that we know him, if we keep his commandments. He who says, 'I know him,' and does not keep his commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in him. But whoever keeps his word, truly the love of God is perfected in him. By this we know that we are in him. He who says he abides in him ought himself also to walk, just as he walked." In other words, if we're following after the commands of God, we ought to see the love of Christ perfected in us. And by this we know that we are in Jesus. The more we follow after him and abide in him, the more our lives ought to reflect his in the way that he lived, how he obeyed, how he followed after the Lord, how he loved other people, cared for them, treated them with compassion, dignity, respect, honor, etc. We ought to smell a little bit like Jesus as we're going out and about in the world. The thought that struck me today that I've been chewing on is the very real possibility that we can be following as much as we can the commands of God and still very much miss the mark. I mean, we know that in general, right? Because, pure righteousness and holiness is unattainable this side of heaven. We can't do it. Jesus alone can do it, did do it. But I'm thinking about the Pharisees as an example. They were following everything down to the jot and tittle, and yet we see Jesus confront them so harshly over and over again because they were critical. They were keeping people from Jesus. They were keeping people from receiving salvation, from accessing the things of God. They were critical, condemning, judgmental. And friends, you and I can very much do the same. We can get so caught up in doing right and wrong that we can start to distance ourselves from people. We can be critical of others. We can look down on them as if they would only just follow after the commands of the Lord, then they would be accepted. How backward is that? We so easily can turn pharisaical as we go about life. And it's a challenge for us today that I just want us to consider a personal assessment of your own love meter, if you would call that. Like, how are you loving toward other people? In chapter 3, it actually says, we know that we have passed from death to life because we love the brethren. He who does not love his brother abides in death. That's how sobering of a realization this is for us. In the book of 1 John, it's like saying how we love one another is actually the proof in the pudding for us. If we are following a super starchy, clean, squeaky clean looking on the outside, but yet we're unloving individuals, we are not following after the ways of Jesus. In verse 16 here, actually it's 18, 16 and 18, I'll read them both. "By this we know love, because he laid down his life for us, and we also ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. My little children, let us not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth." If we say that we are loving individuals, and yet our actions speak very loudly otherwise, we need to take pause and personal assessment of where are we really? If we're following after Jesus, if we're humbly following after him, the more we know him, the more we abide, we ought to all the more become radically loving individuals and loving in deed and action. People know when they're loved. People know it. It looks like grace extended. It looks like a helping hand. It looks like compassion. It looks like support for others, for care. It looks like compassion, understanding. It looks like caring, like just caring, being there for people, being steadfast, being present in their lives. Like love is fleshed out. It's not just empty words. You and I know that by experience, but all the more as we treat one another. So friends, just a simple word to come away with today is, as we're following after the commands of God as believers, do we also see the evidence, the fruit of love in our lives as well that looks like the love of Jesus? Assess your fruit today. What is there for love? In such a time of pandemic and political division and craziness, now is such a time for the church to come above it all and be the most radically loving group of people there ever was, to go across political lines, to reach out and alleviate the suffering brought on by a crazy pandemic, whatever that looks like, job loss, actual physical need, just the stress that it has taken on all of us for, everything, the way of our lives have had to shift. Let's be radical in our love and following after the ways of Jesus. Have a great Friday.